Hi there, students, and welcome to the IB Diploma Business Management course. This is the very first part of the course. We're just going to look at 1.1, which is what is a business. So it's very introductory. We'll learn some new concepts. We will get you thinking about how businesses operate, what kinds of motives businesses have, and then we'll end with some very simple discussion. So we're going to go through some slides. So let's just get started with those slides now, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so Unit 1.1 is simply called What is a Business? And so we're going to start off with a couple of definitions. So a business is a decision-making organization involved in the process of using inputs to produce goods and services. And an entrepreneur is the individual who plans, organizes, and manages a business and its operations, taking on financial risks in doing so. So many people may already have an understanding of what a business is. They may understand entrepreneur in terms of the concept of enterprise. If you studied any economics before, then you'll have heard of land, labor, capital, and enterprise. Enterprise is the fourth factor of production, and the entrepreneur is responsible for combining the land, labor, and the capital in order to produce goods and services. So that's a part of defining a business. The other way to define a business is that it's an organization that uses inputs such as raw materials, components, machinery, equipment, or labor, or always labor, as well as processes. So they use the inputs, they put them into processes to turn the inputs into manufactured goods or, in many cases, services. So those final goods and services are the outputs, final goods and services for customers. We often call them consumers, and we'll get into the difference between a customer and a consumer very shortly. So the whole aim of a business is to generate added value. This means that you combine the inputs to create something that's of more value than the combined value of those particular inputs. So it occurs when a product is able to be sold at a price well above the combined costs involved in production of the good. Goods are physical, tangible products, for example, smartphones, clothes, books, food. Services are intangible products or experiences, things like haircuts, public transport, education, and healthcare. So we often say that services are things that you can't put in a box. You can't really touch them. You can kind of see the experience that's taking place. For example, when you're getting a haircut, you can see the result, but you can't put the service in a box and send it to someone as a gift. Now, needs are the basic necessities needed for survival. So food, water, shelter, and clothing are the things we always associate with needs. And wants are people's desires beyond these necessities, things like smartphones, holidays, and jewelry. Customers are the people who buy the product. But in economics and in business, we also refer to consumers, people who use the product, these consumers. And sometimes they're the same people. When you go and buy something, you're a customer, you're the one that goes and hands over your money, but you also take the product home and you consume it. But in some cases, there is a slight difference. So perhaps, for example, your parents are the customers. They're the ones that see something advertised, they take their money, they exchange it for the particular product, the good or the service, and then they take it home for you to be the person who uses it. So therefore, your parents are the customer, you are in effect the consumer. And we also have consumer goods as opposed to what we call capital goods. So the consumer goods are those sold directly to the public. That's what we normally think of when we think of consumer goods. When we think of businesses, we think they're normally selling to the public. These things can be durable, meaning they last a long time. They can be used over and over again, or in some cases non-durable, such as things that are classed as single-use goods. But they're also capital goods. So capital goods are used by businesses to produce other goods and services sold to businesses. They're also capital goods. So capital goods are used by businesses to produce other goods and services. So businesses produce these capital goods and sell them to other businesses. Within a business, we often divide the different functions of a business. Now, if you're a very small business, for example, a sole trader, a one-person business, then you'll be doing everything. But as the business grows, some of the functions will be sort of separated and spread out and allocated to different groups of people. So you may, for example, have a human resources department. This department manages the personnel and the staff. You'll have a finance department or an accounting department that manages the money and the financial records. You'll have a marketing department. These people identify and meet the customer's needs, and they do things like create promotions, campaigns. And you'll also have the operations department, which is responsible for producing goods and services. So for this purpose, it sort of makes sense to think of a larger business and think of a business that's producing goods. So think of a factory that the goods are being produced, and that's the operations or the production department. But there will also be those other three departments as well: the human resources, the finance, and the marketing. There are also different sectors of the economy. And the most basic, if we start with the bottom of this diagram here, the primary sector is made up of natural resources. So anything that comes from nature, we would consider the primary sector. So agricultural products, for example. Now, those primary sector products are often transformed into something else, and we use the manufacturing process. So we have the secondary sector, also known as the manufacturing sector, where things are transformed into something else. So in factories, we use raw materials to produce things. The tertiary sector is the provision of services. So these services are things like what we saw on the previous slide, things like haircut, maybe travel services, hotel services, education. And a part of the tertiary sector is a special sector called the quaternary sector. And these are like knowledge-based activities. So these are more high-tech kind of services such as research and development. And also sectors of the media would be considered part of the quaternary sector. So we've already sort of begun looking at some of the concepts. What we also need to think about in this little section is when a person starts a business, there are many challenges and opportunities. So some of the challenges involve things like, obviously, you'll have a lack of finance at the very beginning. And therefore, you may have some cash flow problems because you might start the business and you'll have money going out, but not so much money coming in. And the reason you won't have much money coming in is because you don't have any established customers. Now, an exception sort of might be the case of a franchise. A franchise sort of has customers already, even before they open. If you open a McDonald's franchise, for example, it only takes people to drive by and see your sign, see your branding, see the big golden arches, and they're your customers already because they know your product. They've used your product, even though they've consumed your product, tasted your product, even though it was from another store. So in that case, you've kind of got consumers or customers already. But in most cases, a new business starting up, you don't have any customers. You'll also have marketing problems. You've got a lot of things that you need to take care of in terms of getting the word out about your product, about its strengths, and about why people should consume your product. You'll need to manage people. Now, it may be just one person to begin with in a sole trader situation, but it could be a challenge once you start to hire new people. You'll also have to consider high production costs. At the very early stage, your production costs are reasonably high per unit because you haven't been able to benefit by producing in larger numbers, in which case your average cost will begin to fall. We'll get to that in another topic. Now, despite the challenges, obviously there are many reasons why people do want to start a business. They want to start a business because they want to grow or they want to be their own boss. Maybe they're pursuing a passion. Maybe they inherited a business from family members and they want to do the same thing. They want to pass it on to future generations. So there are lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities and lots of reasons why people decide to start a business. There are even more of these examples of challenges and opportunities in your textbook. So just a couple of things to discuss to wind up this little introduction. So there's a question here, and you might want to do this for homework. Discuss the biggest challenge for a new business startup, choosing from lack of finance, cash flow problems, marketing problems, or an unestablished customer base. Now, you could put forward an argument that any one of those might represent the biggest challenge, and it probably depends upon the context. So in this course, you always need to put things into context. You always need to apply your answers to the business, and therefore it will depend on the information that you're provided with. But just for now, you might want to just think about a business that you have a little bit of an understanding of or a little bit of knowledge of, and think of which one of these might have possibly been the biggest obstacle or the biggest challenge when that business was first getting started. Next discussion question, or homework question if you like: how do businesses in the manufacturing sector and the services sector fundamentally add value in different ways? So just think about and possibly do a little bit of research on how products are produced and how value is added. So you might want to just investigate a particular product and look at how much it costs to make the product in terms of its materials. Consider also labor costs and maybe advertising costs and all those kinds of things. And then look at the selling price and see whether you can see that the selling price is far greater than the combined value of the inputs. And the final discussion question: explain the importance for a business of understanding the distinction between customers and consumers, particularly in relation to marketing. So we've talked already about the difference between customers and consumers. Now, why is this important for a business? Of course, they want to know who they can sell the product to. They want to know who is prepared to pay for the product. They might also need to know a little bit more about who the end user is. So, are they targeting children and they're trying to convince parents to buy products for children? And knowing the distinction between the customer, the person who's paying, and the person who's the end user can also be very important. Okay, so we'll end it there. Thank you very much for paying attention, and hopefully you got a bit out of this. And we'll then move on to 1.2, where we start talking about different types of business entities. See you then.